Welcome to my channel. I hope today's story will be something you truly enjoy. Please support me even more. Now, let's begin the story.
My name is Audra Cole. I am 39 years old, and I learned a long time ago that humiliation sounds the cruelest when it is spoken politely. My brother proved that 3 nights before a family dinner that was supposed to celebrate his future. His message came in while I was still at my desk, and at first it looked harmless enough. Just another last-minute change, another small instruction from a family that had always edited me down to something easier to explain. Then I read the real part. He said I could attend dinner with his fiancée's family, but I was not to tell anyone I was his sister. Her father was a federal judge, and it would be embarrassing. A few minutes later, my mother called to smooth it over in the careful voice she always used when she wanted me to accept something ugly without making it inconvenient for anyone else. She said it would be best if I sat at one of the smaller tables in the back, near the service door, just for one evening, just to keep things comfortable. Comfortable for whom, she did not say. That was the thing about my family. They never needed to scream to make their meaning clear. My brother got the spotlight. I got the explanation. He was introduced with pride. I was managed, hidden, reduced. And still, I told them I would come. I would show up on time, sit where they wanted, and say nothing they had not approved. What none of them understood was that the man they were so desperate to impress would know exactly who I was the second he saw my face. So before I tell you what happened when he stopped at my table and the whole room went quiet, tell me this. What would you do if your own family only welcomed you by pretending you did not belong to them at all? I did not answer my brother right away. I set my phone face down on the desk in my chambers and stared at the dark reflection in the screen for a few seconds, because some insults arrive so cleanly they do not feel real at first. They feel rehearsed, familiar even. That message did not come out of nowhere. It came from 39 years of being treated like the piece of the family story that never fit the version they wanted to tell in public. My brother had always been the one people remembered. He was charming without effort, loud in all the right ways, and raised with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing the room will bend around you. My parents built their lives around that confidence. They poured money into private schools, summer programs, debate camps, college admissions coaching, all the invisible scaffolding that makes success look natural from the outside. When he got into a prestigious university, they talked about it like our family name had finally been redeemed. When he landed a polished job in Boston, they repeated his title so often you would have thought he had argued before the Supreme Court. I took a different road, the kind no one in my family ever found interesting enough to memorize. I started at community college because it was what I could afford. I transferred on scholarship, worked late, borrowed what I had to, and kept going. Law school was the same. No safety net, no applause, just exhaustion, discipline, and the quiet understanding that if I ever wanted a real life, I would have to build it with my own hands. I became an assistant U.S. attorney and spent years prosecuting fraud and public corruption cases that made powerful men very nervous. After that, I clerked for Judge Miriam Caldwell, one of the sharpest minds on the First Circuit, a woman whose standards could strip the ego off anyone in under 10 minutes. She was the first person in my life who looked at me and saw not what I lacked, but what I could carry. Over time, she became more than a mentor. She became the closest thing I had ever known to being chosen without condition. When I told her about the dinner, I expected irritation on my behalf. What I got instead was silence, then a very still expression I had learned to respect. She asked me for the name of my brother's fiancé. Then she asked for her father's name. The moment I said it, something changed in her face. She leaned back in her chair and let out the smallest breath of disbelief. Then she said, "So that is who they are trying to impress?" I asked if she knew him. She gave me a look over the rim of her coffee cup and said, "Audra, that man has cited your opinions more than once in public remarks. He knows exactly who you are." That was the moment the shape of the evening changed. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet, but because for the first time, I realized I would not be walking into that room alone. And my brother had no idea the person he was most ashamed to claim was the one person in that entire dinner party they would never be able to dismiss once the truth stepped into the light. By the time Friday evening arrived, I had already decided on two things. I would not give my family the satisfaction of seeing me rattled, and I would not make their lie easier by helping them tell it. Judge Caldwell picked me up just after 6, and we drove into the city under a cold Boston sky that made everything look sharper than it felt. She did not waste words on comfort. That was never her style. She simply glanced at me once, took in the black dress, the understated heels, the calm I had put on like armor, and said, "Good. Let them underestimate you in peace." The Union Club was exactly the kind of place my brother would find intoxicating. Dark wood, polished brass, quiet money, portraits of men who had probably built their reputations before anyone in the room was born. The private dining room overlooked the city lights, and every table was arranged with the kind of precision meant to signal class without ever having to say the word. When we stepped inside, I saw my family before they saw me. My parents were already smiling too hard. My brother was standing near the center of the room with his hand at the waist of his fiancée, wearing the look he always wore when he believed he was finally being seen by the right people. She was elegant, poised, and dressed like someone who had grown up never doubting she belonged in rooms like this. The second my brother noticed me, the color in his face changed. He crossed the room fast, but not fast enough to look panicked to anyone else. Under his breath, with a tight smile still frozen on his face, he told me I was late, even though I was not. Then his eyes flicked to Judge Caldwell, and for half a second I saw confusion. He did not recognize her, but he recognized importance when it walked into a room. Before he could ask anything, his fiancée appeared beside him, gracious in the polished way some people learn before they can legally drive. She greeted me like a stranger she had been told to be kind to, and my brother introduced me with an almost impressive level of dishonesty. He did not call me his sister. He said, "This is Audra. She helps out at the courthouse." I looked at him for a beat longer than was comfortable, but I did not correct him. That was the moment he relaxed, just slightly. He thought silence meant surrender. My mother came over next, kissed the air near my cheek, and told me they had saved me a seat in the back, where it would be quieter. Quieter meant out of sight. My table was the smallest one in the room, set near the service entrance where the staff moved in and out with practiced invisibility. From there, I had a clear view of the main table, where my brother sat with his fiancée and her parents like he had been rehearsing for this role his entire life. Judge Caldwell took a seat not far from mine, close enough to watch, far enough to let the evening unfold exactly as people intended it to. I sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and let the room reveal itself. My brother laughed too loudly. My father tried too hard. My mother kept scanning faces for approval. The fiancé's mother was charming in a controlled way, but her father was different. He said less, watched more, and carried himself with the kind of authority that did not need to announce itself. I could see why my brother was desperate to impress him. Men like that did not simply influence rooms, they defined them. The first round of toasts began, and I noticed something else. The man my family was trying so hard to impress was not especially captivated by any of it. He listened, he nodded, he smiled when required, but every so often his eyes drifted, as if he were measuring something the rest of the room had failed to notice. Then, just before dinner service settled in, he stood and picked up a tray of champagne flutes from one of the servers. It was apparently a habit of his, something personal and old-fashioned. He liked to make a pass around the room himself, greeting guests table by table before the main course began. I watched him move from one table to the next, exchanging a few pleasant words, shaking a hand here, offering a polite smile there. My brother looked almost giddy, like this simple gesture had already become part of the family legend he planned to tell for the next 20 years. Then the judge turned toward the back of the room and started walking in my direction. At that point, I do not think anyone at the main table was paying much attention. To them, I was exactly where they wanted me, quiet and small and safely out of the way. But the second he reached my table and got a clear look at my face, his entire expression changed. He stopped so suddenly that the tray tilted in his hands, and one of the champagne flutes gave a soft, sharp clink against another. For a second, he just stared at me, not with confusion, not with the polite effort of someone trying to place a face, but with unmistakable recognition. Then he set the tray down on the empty corner of my table and straightened like instinct had taken over before thought could catch up. His voice, when it came, was not casual. It carried. "Ma'am, Judge Cole, I did not realize you were here tonight." The room went still in the way only wealthy, well-trained rooms can go still, where silence is immediate because everyone understands at once that something has shifted. My brother turned first, then my parents, then his fiancée. I rose from my chair out of habit, and before I could say a word, Judge Theodore Ward reached for my hand with both of his and gave me the kind of respectful greeting reserved for colleagues, not distant dinner guests hidden near a service entrance. "It is wonderful to see you again," he said, still sounding genuinely caught off guard. "I read your opinion in the Holloway privacy matter twice. I told two of my clerks that if they wanted to learn how to build an argument without wasting a single sentence, they should start there." By then, every face in the room was turned toward us. My brother looked like all the blood had drained out of him at once. His fiancée's expression was harder to read. At first, it was confusion, then disbelief, then the first crack of something much uglier beginning to form. My mother gave a nervous laugh and stepped forward too quickly, like she thought momentum alone could control the story. She said something weak about me being modest and not liking attention, but Judge Ward barely glanced at her. His focus stayed on me. He asked why I had not told him I would be there. I almost answered, but there was no reason to rescue anyone from what they had built. Before I could decide how much truth to offer, Judge Caldwell stood and crossed the room with the kind of unhurried confidence that made people move aside, without realizing they were doing it. "Theodore," she said, "I had a feeling this evening might surprise you." He turned, recognized her immediately, and his surprise deepened into something close to disbelief. "Miriam." "You brought her." "Of course I brought her," Judge Caldwell replied. I was curious how long it would take before someone in this room realized who had been seated in the back. No one spoke after that. There was no place left to hide. Judge Ward looked from Miriam to me, then toward the main table where my brother was still standing, frozen beside the woman he had planned to marry into power. He asked the question calmly, but calm made it worse. "Why is Judge Audra Cole sitting back here by the service door?" My brother opened his mouth, but nothing useful came out. He tried a smile that collapsed before it formed. He said there had been some confusion with seating. Then he made the mistake that destroyed whatever chance he had left. He added, "Audra does not really care where she sits." It was such a small sentence, but it told the whole story. It was the voice of someone who had spent his life deciding what I did and did not deserve, and assuming I would accept the version he handed me. Judge Ward's eyes sharpened. His daughter looked at my brother as if she were seeing a stranger step out from behind a familiar face. I could almost feel the room rearranging itself around the truth. Then Judge Ward pulled out the chair across from me and sat down at my table instead of returning to his own. That single choice landed harder than a public accusation ever could have. He did not raise his voice. He did not create a scene. He simply made it clear in front of everyone which person in the room commanded his respect. And in that moment, my brother finally understood what it felt like to be the one left standing in the wrong place while the world watched. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The servers seemed to sense the tension and disappeared through the side doors with the kind of silent efficiency only expensive places ever master. My brother was still standing beside the main table, one hand half lifted like he thought he could somehow talk his way back into control if he found the right sentence fast enough. He never did. Judge Ward rested one hand on the table near his glass and looked directly at him. His voice stayed even, which made every word land harder. I asked a simple question. Why is Judge Audra Cole seated back here? My mother stepped in first, because that had always been her instinct whenever the truth got too close. She gave a brittle smile and said there had been a misunderstanding with the seating chart, that everything had happened in a rush, that no one meant anything by it. Judge Caldwell did not let her get more than 2 sentences in. She reached into her bag, took out her phone, and looked at me once as if giving me the chance to stop her. I said nothing. She turned the screen toward Judge Ward and said, I think the seating was actually very intentional. Then she read the message out loud. Not a summary, not a softened version, the exact words. My brother had told me I could attend, but I was not to say I was his sister because her father was a federal judge and it would be embarrassing. The silence after that was worse than shouting. It was the kind of silence that leaves no room for denial because everyone in it has heard the same truth at the same time. Genevieve stared at my brother as if she were waiting for him to laugh and say it had all been a misunderstanding, but he was too stunned to perform. My father looked down at the tablecloth like there might be an answer stitched into it. My mother went pale. Judge Ward did not react immediately. He just held out his hand, and Judge Caldwell passed him the phone. He read the message himself, slowly, then read it again. When he finally looked up, his face had gone cold in a way that seemed almost courtroom familiar, as if some private switch inside him had flipped from social courtesy to judicial clarity. He asked my brother if the message was authentic. Miles swallowed hard and said it looked bad out of context. Out of context. Even now, that was what he reached for. Not an apology. Not shame. Just a plea for a better frame. Genevieve let out a small sound beside him, not quite a gasp, not quite a laugh, but something closer to disbelief curdling into disgust. She turned to him and asked, You told me she did administrative work at the courthouse. You told me she barely had contact with the family. You told me she did not like formal events. My brother tried to answer all 3 lies at once and only managed to tangle himself further. He said he had been trying to keep the night simple. He said he did not want things to become awkward. He said he thought introducing me as his sister would shift attention away from the dinner. That was when Judge Ward finally spoke again, and every eye in the room went to him. He said, No. What you feared was comparison. He set the phone down carefully on the table and leaned back in his chair, still calm, still devastating. You did not hide your sister to protect the evening. You hid her because you knew the truth about her would make every story you have told about yourself feel smaller. No one contradicted him because no one could. The accuracy of it hit the room like a door slamming shut. Genevieve's face changed first. The confusion was gone now. In its place was humiliation. Yes, but underneath that was anger. The kind that comes when a person realizes they were not merely misled, but made into an accessory to someone else's dishonesty. She asked my brother how many times he had done this before. He said it was not like that. She asked whether my parents knew. Neither of them answered quickly enough. That delay told her everything. Judge Caldwell did not need to pile on, but she did what experienced people do when liars start hoping emotion will blur the facts. She supplied precision. She explained in the driest possible tone that I had served as an assistant U.S. attorney for years, that I had built a reputation on complex corruption cases, that my opinions from the bench had already drawn national attention inside legal circles, and that anyone in this room who actually respected the law should have recognized my name long before tonight. Judge Ward nodded once at that. Then he looked at Genevieve and said something that seemed to break whatever remained of the evening. I have cited your sister's reasoning in discussions with my clerks. I have recommended her writing to young lawyers. And this man sat her at the back of the room near a service door because he thought her existence might embarrass him. My brother's shoulders dropped a fraction, the way people physically shrink when they realize charm has abandoned them. He took a step toward my table, finally trying to speak to me directly, but I held his gaze with the same calm I had worn all evening. I did not raise my voice. I did not rescue him. I simply let him stand inside the truth he had created. He said my name like he expected familiarity to save him. It did not. Judge Ward's expression hardened further, and when he spoke again, there was a finality in it that everyone heard. A man who erases his own sister to appear more impressive is not a man I can trust with my daughter's future. That sentence did what no argument could. It ended the performance. My brother stopped trying to explain and started looking afraid. My mother sat down without meaning to, as if her knees had made the decision for her. My father covered his mouth with one hand, and Genevieve, still staring at the man she had planned to marry, slowly began to take off her engagement ring. No one breathed while Genevieve slid the ring from her finger. She did not do it dramatically. That was what made it worse for him. There were no tears, no shaking hands, no desperate speech about betrayal. She simply looked at the ring for 1 second as if it belonged to a version of the evening that no longer existed, then set it beside her water glass with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than anything else that had happened all night. My brother stared at it like he did not understand what he was seeing. Then he looked at her, and for the first time since Judge Ward had recognized me, his face showed something real: panic. He said her name once, quietly, like he thought this could still be handled in private if he kept his voice low enough. Genevieve did not even sit back down. She stepped away from him and said the one thing men like my brother never expect to hear from the women they have spent months performing for. You did not just lie to me. You lied about the kind of man you are. My brother immediately tried to turn toward me because that was his instinct even now. He wanted the fix to come from the same person he had just tried to erase. He crossed half the room and stopped beside my chair, speaking in that strained, urgent voice people use when they want forgiveness before they have earned the right to ask for it. Audra, please. Can we talk outside for a second? He said it like I owed him privacy, like I should help him contain the mess he had made in public. I looked up at him and saw what I had spent most of my life seeing too late. He was not sorry because he understood the cruelty of what he had done. He was sorry because the room had finally stopped rewarding him for it. So I kept my voice level and said, "No, you were comfortable humiliating me in front of a room full of strangers. You can hear my answer in front of them too." That hit him harder than if I had shouted. He flinched and several people at the main table looked away, suddenly fascinated by their glasses, their napkins, the city lights beyond the windows. Judge Ward stood then, not quickly, not angrily, but with the kind of authority that makes movement itself feel like a ruling. He told Genevieve to get her coat if she was ready to leave. Then he turned to my brother and said that the wedding would not be moving forward and that there would be no further discussions about funding, planning, or family introductions. The sentence was clean, final, and impossible to negotiate. My mother found her voice then, but it came out thin and desperate. She said everyone was overreacting. She said families said hurtful things sometimes. She said my brother had made a mistake and should not lose everything over one message. Judge Caldwell looked at her with the same expression she used on careless attorneys in her courtroom and said, "This was not one message. This was a habit that finally met witnesses." That line seemed to strip the last defense out of the room. Because she was right. The text was only evidence. The real offense had been going on for years. My father tried once to speak to me directly, but the words died somewhere between his mouth and the table. He had spent too many years saying nothing when silence benefited him. It was too late to make that look like wisdom now. Genevieve returned with her coat over one arm. She did not look at my brother again. She looked at me. There was humiliation in her face, but there was also something steadier, something almost grateful under the shock. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I should have asked better questions." I nodded because that was the only honest response I had. She left with her parents a moment later, and the entire temperature of the room dropped with them. The dinner was over, even though half the plates had not been touched. Conversations that had once sounded warm and polished were gone. All that remained was the wreckage of performance after the audience had stopped believing in it. My brother made one last attempt. He said my name again, softer this time, like we were children, and he could still pull rank through familiarity. I stood before he could finish. I told him there was nothing left to discuss. Not tonight, not privately, not after years of being useful only when I was willing to stay small. Then I picked up my bag. Judge Caldwell rose beside me without a word. As we walked toward the door, I could feel every eye in the room follow us, but for the first time in my life, that attention did not feel like judgment. It felt like correction. Outside, the Boston air was cold enough to cut through the last of the heat in my face. Judge Caldwell waited until we reached the curb before she spoke. She asked if I was all right. I looked back once through the tall front windows and saw my brother still standing where I had left him, stranded in the ruins of the image he had spent his entire life trying to sell. Then I turned away and said the truest thing I had felt all night. I am now. By the next morning, the story had already started moving through the kind of private circles my brother had spent his whole adult life trying to enter. Not because I told anyone. I did not have to. Rooms like that have their own way of carrying humiliation forward, especially when the humiliation exposes character instead of just bad manners. A broken engagement at a formal family dinner would have been gossip on its own. A broken engagement after the groom tried to hide that his sister was a respected federal judge became something else entirely. It became a warning. Within a week, my brother's carefully managed reputation began to crack in places he could not patch. One of the senior partners at his firm had known Judge Ward for years through legal charities and bar events, and by the time Monday afternoon rolled around, my brother was called into a meeting he was not prepared for. No one accused him of committing a crime. They did something worse. They questioned his judgment, his honesty, and the version of himself he had been selling to clients and colleagues. A man can survive being disliked in those rooms. What he cannot survive is being seen as small, vain, and fundamentally untrustworthy. He was taken off a major client development track first. Then he lost the internal support he had been counting on for promotion. 3 weeks later, the firm asked for his resignation. They worded it politely, of course. People always do when they want the damage to look civilized. But it was still an ending, and he knew it. The collapse did not stop there. Without the wedding, without the new money, without the social lift he had been building toward, the life he had designed began to come apart faster than even I expected. He had leased an apartment he could no longer comfortably afford because he had been planning to step into a much bigger life through marriage. He had debt hidden under polished clothes, curated dinners, and networking smiles. Once the job disappeared, the rest followed. The apartment went first, then the car, then the image. By the end of that winter, the same man who had once decided I was too embarrassing to claim was calling people he had not respected in years, asking for introductions, asking for favors, asking for work. Most of them did not call back. My parents did what people like them always do when a lie finally costs too much. They rewrote history. At first, they begged me to speak to him. Then they begged me not to be cruel. Then they tried to present the whole thing as a family misunderstanding that had somehow spiraled out of proportion. My mother sent me a 4-page email about forgiveness, loyalty, and how siblings should never let outsiders come between them. I read exactly half of the first paragraph before I deleted it. My father left 2 voicemails that sounded more tired than sorry. He said the family was falling apart. He said my brother was under unbearable pressure. He said I had always been the stronger one and should know when to let something go. That was the moment I understood one final truth about them. They did not want justice. They wanted access. They wanted the version of me who would absorb injury quietly, so the rest of them could go back to living without consequence. That version of me was gone. I changed my number, filtered their emails, and told my clerk to decline any personal deliveries that came to Chambers without review. I did not do it out of anger. I did it out of clarity. There is a difference, and learning it changed my life. Genevieve never went back to him. A month after the dinner, I received a short handwritten note from her. It was simple, far more honest than anything my own family had sent. She thanked me without trying to make herself the center of the pain. She wrote that seeing how easily a man could diminish his own sister had forced her to confront how often charm is mistaken for character. She ended by saying that what happened at that dinner may have embarrassed her, but marrying him would have destroyed her. I kept the note, not because we became close, but because truth is rare, and I have learned to respect it wherever it appears. As for me, I did what I had always done. I went back to work. I read briefs, heard arguments, wrote opinions, and built my life in the steady, disciplined way I always had. The difference was that there was no longer a part of me waiting for my family to catch up to who I was. That waiting had been heavier than I realized. Once it was gone, everything became cleaner. About 11 months after the dinner, a vacancy on the First Circuit became real, and for the first time, my name was not just mentioned quietly. It was advanced seriously. Judge Caldwell stood behind me without hesitation. Judge Ward, to his credit, did something I never asked for and never expected. He spoke publicly, in the proper professional way, about my rigor, my writing, and my temperament. He did not do it as a favor. He did it because he believed it. That mattered more. When I was finally nominated, the only people who seemed surprised were the ones who had never taken the time to know me. The hearing process was long, demanding, and exactly the kind of work I respected. When confirmation came, I did not cry. I thought about the small table by the service door. I thought about how hard my brother had worked to make me disappear. And I thought about the fact that in the end, the only person erased from that world was him. My swearing in was held in a packed ceremonial courtroom, bright with winter light and full of people who had chosen me in the ways that matter. Judge Caldwell was there. Judge Ward was there. Former clerks, colleagues, staff, and the people who had seen me at my best and worst were there. My parents were not invited. My brother was not told. Some people would call that harsh. I call it accurate. Family is not proved by blood when blood has been used as leverage, silence, and shame. Family is proved by respect. By who tells the truth about you when lying would be easier. By who stands beside you without asking you to shrink first. That is the lesson my brother paid dearly to learn, and the cost kept rising long after the dinner ended. He lost the engagement he thought would elevate him. He lost the career path he had built on performance instead of substance. He lost the home he could not sustain without the future he assumed was guaranteed. But the most expensive thing he lost was something he will never get back. He lost the right to say he had a sister who would still answer when he called. If there is any value in what happened, it is this. The people who truly love you will never need you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. And the people who ask you to disappear for their comfort are not protecting the family. They are revealing themselves. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not humiliation, not shouting, not destruction. Sometimes it is standing still in the truth long enough for everyone else to see who had value all along. At Revenge Argon, our team is always working hard to create meaningful, engaging stories that leave viewers with valuable lessons. We want to make it clear that this is a fictional story created for entertainment and educational purposes, with the goal of sharing positive messages and helpful life insights. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please follow and support Revenge Argon so we can stay motivated to create more high-quality, compelling videos for you.